successful nutritional mathematics. I said nutrition was math. Forage nutrients plus supplemental nutrients should equal the requirements of different animals. So you're not going to, most of it, unless you have this burning interest in nutrition, you're not going to actually do the mathematics. Some of you might. But at least understanding what those mathematics are and being able to kind of visualize how we're trying to approach this should help you. All horses have the same requirements for nutrients in terms of what they require. They require water first. They require energy. They require protein. They require minerals, and they require vitamins in different levels, in different amounts, depending on age, activity, physiological state, what they do for a living. You know, do they stay barefoot and pregnant, or do they go out and event or ride? All of these things are going to impact on their requirements, and there's a difference in requirements. And used to, and even sometimes now, I think as nutritionists, we're guilty of trying to make a feed for every horse. And we're less so here than they are in Europe. But here we have, and it started with Purina, and Les Brewer, who was a nutritionist at Purina for a long time, was a good friend of mine. And so what did they have? They had Omeline 300, they had Omeline 200, they had Omeline 100, then they had Race Ready, and then they had a low starch feed, low sugar, low starch, high fiber feed, which is kind of like a slim fast bar for a horse. And so we wanted to categorize everything. But I'm telling you, from my standpoint, at working with most of the major farms in central Kentucky and many in the world, I can do a feed and make it work across the board if I'm smart about it. And I don't have to worry about which tag Jose can't read. You know, like they're bags of horse feed, and they take the bag and they open the bag and they feed the amount of feed that I want them to feed for a class of horses. If I have 5 different tag colors and I tell the help, okay, the weanlings get purple and the yearlings get blue and the mares get pink and the layups get green, it's going to be a damn mess as far as I'm concerned. So I'm into simplicity. Use the KISS principle. You know the KISS principle? It's keep it simple, stupid. All right? So I usually try to use to formulate diets that work at certain rates of intake across the board. All right? But all of those feeds are going to provide the nutrients I'm trying to provide for the class of horse that I'm feeding. All right, now I'm going to scurry a little bit through some of these. Let me just kind of boil the water down to again, no pun intended. Horses need fresh, clean water all the time. That's the easiest way, and you know, there are a lot of wives' tales out there like, don't feed a hot horse cold water because it's going to make them colic or founder bullshit. All right? Horses need access to fresh, clean water all the time. All right? And if you just do that and kind of follow it, it's easy. But I'll show you a couple of things that impacts on it. If you look at maintenance for a 1,100-pound horse in 68 degrees Fahrenheit, all right, which is in the zone of thermal neutrality. They don't produce a lot of heat. They would consume about 6.5 gallons per day. How many of you go to work and before you go to work in the morning, you fill up a water bucket in the horse's stall? Any horses in the stall, either for foot abscess or because they get fat on asphalt and water. That's what I do. And then when I get home at night, usually there's some water left. But that, you know, for maintenance for 68 degrees, that's probably about what they drink. If you increase the environmental temperature to 86 degrees, then they're going to consume 12 gallons per day, so double. All right, so water intake is very, very related to environmental temperature. Now, if they're on fresh forage in hot weather, does that have any impact on how much water they're going to drink out of a bucket? Absolutely, because the fresh forage is 80% water, isn't it? I know a farm in Japan that doesn't have automatic waters in their fields in the summertime. And they say, well, they get, it's 80% water, and they're eating 68 to 82 kilos per day. That's a lot of water they're consuming in grass. I can't go there, but, there's a rational argument there. If you look at exercise, if you look at moderate exercise at 68 degrees, it's about 10 gallons per day. If you look at moderate exercise at 95 degrees, you're talking about 21 gallons of water per day. All right, so anyway, exercise and environmental temperature are going to impact on that. But the best thing is to just say, it's just like salt. Horses need free choice access to salt. Horses need free choice access to water. Energy is basically probably the most important parameter that we've got to look at if we're going to do a good job putting a feeding program together. And basically, calories, megajoules, after water should be the first thing you talk about, is caloric intake. Unfortunately, it's the same for humans, and we don't pay much attention to it. But if you don't know how many calories you're trying to get into a horse, then you don't know the concentration of other nutrients that's got to be in the feed. All right, and so your M30 thing, they're depending on other sources of calories to meet the horse's caloric requirement, and you're using a very highly concentrated source of vitamins and minerals and protein to meet those requirements. Whereas if you're feeding a full feed, 7 pounds of a horse feed would provide that same amount of all of those nutrients plus calories. All right, so understanding energy is the most important thing. How do you determine if you're meeting a horse's energy requirements? By what? The eye of the weight. The eye of the master fattens ox. The scale doesn't weigh. Doesn't lie. Mine doesn't weigh, obviously. But it's the eye of the master fattens. Look at the horse. And we spend a lot of time in Kentucky weighing horses. And we weigh young horses monthly, religiously. Most of the big farms. TaylorMade, Lane's End, Pin Oak, Three Chimneys, Denali. I don't know if Claiborne does. That may be the last holdout for the hard boot thing. But most farms now are weighing horses, and we weigh mares too a lot. How much does a thoroughbred mare weigh? Yeah, that's right dead on. All right, I got one that weighs a little bit more than that, but what did we always think about in terms of how we're estimating feed and everything? 1,000-pound mare, didn't we? There ain't no such animal. There is, but if you look at the average, it's way above 1,000 pounds. It's actually 500 kilos is kind of the numbers that we use for requirements, and 500 kilos is 1,100 pounds, which is on the smallish side. At least for me, I like a big, stout, soggy mare that's going to have a big, stout, soggy foal, all right, that I can race or sell. So we underestimate what they weigh. Is that ever a problem anywhere else? When you go down and get your Ekvalan or your dewormer, and you're going to deworm these horses, what dose do you use? Does it matter? Sure it matters. So you're supposed to give a lot of drugs and anthelmintics by weight, aren't you? But a lot of us don't have any idea what this hussy weighs. All right? So we need to be a little bit more accurate. And is a weight tape a good standard? Yeah, it's not very accurate, really. But understanding using the correct averages is going to get us close. But there are a lot of things that we do, antibiotics, anthelmintics, that if we're far enough below where we should be, all we do is antagonize that damn bug, and make him resistant. So understanding the weight of the horse is very important. We've talked about fiber and the importance of fiber, how much energy is there. And let me just give it from a little bit of a comparative standpoint. Legume hay's fared about 2.2 megacalories per kilo. And you don't have to remember these numbers, but just kind of comparatively. Grass hay's significantly less than that, 1.2 to 1.6 maybe megacalories per kilo. Forage, fresh forage, surprisingly can be up as high as 3 megacalories per kilo, which is what is characteristic of grain. So, can horses get fat on forage? You bet they can. Because you're turning them out 24 hours a day, or 20, on concentrate, basically. Because the energy value of that feed that's growing at that time of year is very, very big. So fiber is a very good and preferable source. The second would be starch. And starch comes predominantly from where? Feed sacks, right? Grains, all right? Corn, oats, barley, wheat byproducts are the predominant sources of starch. And starch is, our grains are about 3 megacalories per kilo, so higher than fiber. Fat, can you feed horses fat? We think about oil. If you read the back of it, can you feed horses tallow? Tallow is animal fat. Tallow comes from cattle. Or lard. Sure you can. Will you? Sure you won't. Because there's something unpalatable about thinking about feeding animal fat to your pony or to your horse or so on. But they can utilize it. But they can utilize fat in terms of vegetable oil very, very effectively. The digestibility of vegetable oil is about 90%. And it all occurs pre-cecally. What do I mean by pre-cecally? Where is it digested? In small intestine. All right. So, have you heard anybody ever tell you, I feed some corn oil to keep them from colicking? Where do most colics occur? Is it in the small intestine? No, it's in the hindgut, right? And cecum in the large colon. So where did they get that they're feeding corn oil to keep this horse from colicking? Well, one time when they had a horse colicking, the veterinarian came out and he put this tube, a nasogastric tube, and he administered what? Mineral oil, or liquid paraffin, they call it in Europe. And if it was effective, pretty soon this horse is painting the walls. Why is that not the same as vegetable oil? None, zero. Mineral oil or liquid paraffin is 100% inert. All right, it's not digested any. All of it gets to the back to grease the chute. But in vegetable oils, it's all digested in the small intestine. And is fat high in caloric density? What does a doctor tell you when you want to lose weight? Reduce your fat consumption, right? Now, how much of a human diet is fat? 20% up. How much of a horse diet is fat? 4 to 5%. All right, so we don't have hardening of the arteries and so on. But it's a very useful source of energy. It's useful both from the standpoint of energy density, because it's 2.25 times as high in energy as starch. It's useful from a digestibility standpoint because it's very highly digestible. It's interesting from the standpoint of supplying essential fatty acids, and we're learning more about essential fatty acids in terms of what they do for the horse. And so it's a very good source of calories predominantly. If you look at a feed tag and it says 4% crude fat, how much fat are they adding? 0. 4% would be natural ingredients. Oats are 4%. So if you want a fat-added diet, then we're looking at diets at 6 to 8% fat. And most racehorse diets that I do right now, and prep diets from prep and yearlings, are from 8 to 10% fat. Now, I've started using, this is corn oil. No, it's vegetable oil. It's a mixed vegetable oil. Corn oil has been kind of the standard for a long time, and I used a lot of it for prepping horses and when I was showing halter horses and for race horses. But now we've gone more to mixed vegetable oil that has a better omega-6, omega-3 ratio. Okay, omega-6 fatty acids and omega-3 fatty acids. So corn oil is high in omega-6 fatty acids. Does that mean it's toxic? No. Does it mean that you can probably feed a fat source that's better? Yes. And if you look at what those are, rice bran oil is a very good source of omega-3 fatty acids. The best vegetable source is linseed oil, flaxseed, either extruded or actual flaxseed oil. That is the best vegetable source. And then there's some fish-derived omega-3 fatty acid oils that are effective. And why are we on the omega-3 fatty acid thing? One is that we think that they're probably anti-inflammatory for the horse, and there's been work done at Texas A&M where they looked at horses in training and lameness and inflammatory response, and they felt like that omega-3 fatty acids were effective in reducing inflammation in the joints. And so we don't know all the answers. If you held a gun to my head and said, do you have to feed omega-3 fatty acids, I'd plead innocence. But there is data that suggests that it's effective, and it's certainly effective from a digestion standpoint. And you've heard it, it's all the rage on human, isn't it? How many of you take fish oil tablets? Some. I don't. I've never taken a supplement in my life, ever. Nothing, ever. Maybe if I did, I'd play in the NFL instead of just being the way I am. But basically, I'm not a supplement person. So, how do we determine energy requirements being met? Body weight, body composition. This was me before I started taking an omega-3 fatty acid supplement. Body composition, growth rate. In young horses, do you do it by weight? It's hard to do. You have to do growth rate. Is the growth rate appropriate for the age of that horse? Work performance, or visually. You know, if you don't have enough gas in the tank, you're not going to go very far. And you know, I've seen a big change, I think, myself, in the condition that's acceptable for horses on the racetrack. And I think it's moved up with a little bit more insurance. And maybe that's partially because most people feed a formula feed now, don't they? And so we know we're meeting requirements across the board. This is a broken valve filly out of a mare that I bought out of Ned Evans' dispersal. Her name's Stellar. And this filly is a classic example of my intelligence. I sold her for $87,000 at Keeneland as a September yearling, and she was sold at Fasig-Tipton in Florida as a 2-year-old for $450,000. So I'm pretty damn smart, huh? but that happens. And she couldn't outrun a fat man, which also happens. So anyway, evaluation of this horse in terms of condition, in terms of weight, growth rate, average daily gain, weight per day of age. We spend a lot of time doing that. Now, do you have to have a scale to get it done right? No. And I had a lot of the old hard boots when we started weighing these horses say, look, I'm a good enough horseman that I don't need to weigh these horses. I can tell by the eye. But they did it anyway. They weighed them anyway. And it's become an invaluable tool in assessing growth rate and in assessing progress that are made with these things. The eye of the master fattens the ox. Can we meet the energy requirements of the horse with forage alone? Yay, nay, maybe. Sometimes. They're all good answers. The obvious answer, if we couldn't, they'd have been gone a long time ago. They wouldn't have evolved. Although I suspect that the wild horses phenotypically were somewhat different than the ones that we raise now. And, with domestication, we've made them depend on us a little bit more. But do horses get fat in the summertime on pasture? Absolutely. So you can meet horses' energy requirements with pasture alone or with forage alone. And you do the math and it's blatantly clear that you can do that. So why do we even feed grain? Yeah, the price limited. We don't have to. One of the reasons is availability of forage. All right, either because of seasonal changes or space per horse or cost. There are a lot of things that makes that forage available or not. Assessing whether a pasture just has a green haze on it and is actually a gymnasium, or is it a source of nutrients? All right, so we can get that wrong. So the availability. One is the next is cost, and you should be able to do nutritional cost analysis here. And there are a lot of times at $320 a ton, it may be that in terms of cost of omega calorie of DE, that grain is a better buy than hay. So what you do then is you kind of titrate back a little bit to say this is the inflection point where I can increase grain amount a little bit without getting in trouble, decrease forage amount, and actually do it cheaper. Do you believe that or not? That's what it is. You can do the math, and I'll show you later if you want to know how to do that. What's probably the predominant reason is that some forages are deficient in certain nutrients for certain classes of horses. For instance, just a short one. Your forages up here run from 6 to 8 parts per million copper. What is a part per million? Anybody know? It's a milligram per kilo. Is a part per million. And your zinc levels up here are 22 to 26 parts per million zinc. If you do the math, your selenium levels are 0.08 parts per million selenium. Maybe a tick higher in some places. So if you do the math, that means the pastures in upstate is this upstate? In upstate New York. And the pastures, by the way, in Kentucky, which has flawless pastures that were ordained by God to feed horses, are the same. They're exactly the same in copper, zinc, and a little bit high in selenium. So that means that if you do the math on trace mineral intake, that these horses are marginal to deficient in these nutrients. So if you do nothing else, then you need to figure out a way. If your horses are fat and they're happy and you're feeding them hay and pasture, you need to figure out a way to to supplement minerals, and maybe some calcium during times of the year when you may have this inverted calcium-phosphorus ratio. All right, so we have to feed a supplement, and a supplement to me doesn't have to be powdered bat wings and foo-foo dust in a little pot. A supplement means a nutrient I'm providing to that horse that is inadequate in the basal diet. In fact, I hate supplements. So you're looking at the forage, you're looking at the total diet, you're looking at somebody that's feeding pasture plus straight oats, and you say, this ration's got a problem. I'm missing some nutrients. How do I go about fixing that? All right, and there are lots of different ways you can fix it. Luckily, there are many commercial ways that you can fix it that are easy peasy and make a lot of sense. Convenience. What do I mean by convenience? Any of you ever filled your loft with hay? I have. All right. And it's a hell of a lot easier for me to go down to the feed store and get a ton of feed than it is for me to put a ton of hay in the loft. So a lot of times we defer to convenience, all right? And we know that my loft holds enough hay to get me through the middle of February if I feed what I should. But if I cut them back just a little bit, I can make it till March when the grass starts to grow a little bit. So it's more convenient for us to feed a little hard feed. Storage. Do you have lofts big enough to hold enough hay to get you through for a year? If you do, you're lucky. Mine won't quite get it done. All right, so that means I've got to pay some hay baron in the middle of the winter to bring me some hay and charge me double for it. All right, so storage is a combination of cost, convenience, and storage. Now, if you have somebody and you tell your hay guy, hey, put 10 tons of hay in barn 4, this doesn't apply to you. It applies to me. Convention. What do I mean by convention? Convention means you don't feed pregnant mares a forage-only diet. All right? Can you? Probably, yes. Good hay, good pasture, yes. Do you? No. If I told my clients, just feed these things hay, how long would I last? Not very. Are you crazy? You're a lunatic. You got to feed like pregnant mares. Feed in order for them to develop full. And that's probably true to some extent. I can get it done better. But I also can do it with the math on good hay. But conventionally, that's not what you do. And so what you have to do is find an area there where it's that you're meeting requirements. You're doing it in a manner that's safe. You're doing it in a manner that's conventional. You do it in a manner that is cost effective and that produces you the best product. And that to me is what nutrition is all about, is making these adjustments on the fly so that you can get the job done right. What time am I supposed to stop 2? Is that right? No. No. Why don't we take a few minutes, or I'll take some questions at this point, and then I'm going to come back and I'm going to talk to you about effective feeding of different classes of horses, the thing that you actually probably came to know something about. Any questions?
So in clay-based soils here, we get soil compaction.
Yep.
Nature of the beast. My curiosity was using a crop like daikon radish, which we know breaks up soil. Have you done any work or seen anybody that grazes daikon radish?
No, not by horses. They graze them a lot in Europe for sheep and for cattle. The problem, I guess I should speak into that. The question was grazing daikon radish. Oh, daikon's poison, isn't it? Daikon radish. Maybe that helped my finances some, but I don't know. The horses are the worst about pasture. The worst. because of compaction. It doesn't matter what kind of soil you have. If you have Maury silt loam, or if you have a clay-based soil, or if you have a sand, they're terrible about soil compaction. And I don't know any plant that you really can do. I think aeration helps. To run an aerator over it helps with it. But horses are just bad about compaction. We had a horrible summer. It rained. We actually set a new all-time record for rainfall in Kentucky for this year, for as long as records have been kept. So we had a wet spring. The pastures were damaged. They didn't really recuperate before it got hot. We had a plague of crabgrass that is a warm season grass. It's an annual that choked out the bluegrass and the orchard grass. When it died and became brown, it shaded out the desirable species of grasses, and so now we have another damn mud hole. And I'm going to have to spend a lot of money next year reseeding. And part of that is because of the nature of the beasts that we raise. You know, they, like when you turn one out in a paddock, what's the first thing they do? They raise their head and they gaze across the pasture and they try to find the most highly erodible place in that pasture to run up and down, don't they? All right? And people say, well, you ought to be smarter about how you fence this place. You know, when the only level place on my farm is about as big as that table, you got to fence on a slope sometime, all right? And then you turn two fillies out together. And I think actually most of my thoroughbred fillies off the racetrack have reining horse blood in them somewhere, because you run across a pasture and slide to a stop and slings mud and sod, don't they? So it's part of it's the beast that we raise, and part of it is a little bit the way we manage them, particularly if we put them in the barn at night and feed them too damn much and then turn them out the next morning and they feel so good that they can't stand themselves, then they're pretty effective plows. You know, whereas horses that are kept outside probably aren't as. But that wasn't your question. The question is, I've never fed daikon radish.
Is this on?
Yeah, I really don't know. We don't overseed probably as much as we should. Like I could make a case of overseeding with some annual rye in the fall, just as kind of a nurse crop, provide us some more forage, but we don't. And annual rye seed has gotten to be as expensive. It's actually, annual rye is not that expensive, but a lot of the ryegrass seeds are expensive. And seeds for horse pastures in general are like crazy expensive right now, regardless what you do. Yep.
Yes, I wanted to talk a little bit about extreme cold climate, because my farm is up near the Canadian border, and it's quite often 20 below zero, or not all the time, but it can be very severe. And I find that horses don't drink enough when it's that cold. They need more water, I think. But I'm lucky enough to have hot water in my barn, so I mix hot water and they drink. But no, this is upstate New York, but I'm up in the, practically in the tundra, you know what I mean? It's a little different. And I just wondered if you could address that.
Sure, it's a good question. One of my clients that we've gotten the most done over the last 22 years is North Hills Management in Japan, in Hokkaido. And I'm going there Monday. And I've been colder there than I've ever been in my life. When I was taking notes on horses, there were things appearing on the paper, but I had no idea how they were getting there because my hands were totally numb. And I carry 4 pens in my pocket because they only last for about 3 horses before they freeze, and I have to put it close to my heart again and get another one out. So I understand cold. We raise those horses outside. We were the first farm in Japan to do it. They come up in the morning and they eat and they lay down for a couple of 3 hours and they get fed some hay, and then they get fed outside in the afternoon and hay, but they're out all night long. That's the plan. It's not the rule, all right? There are no rules. If it's going to be a blizzard, we bring the damn things in. But in general, and I'm talking Hokkaido. This is like close to the tundra too. It gets very, very cold, -20 frequently. We have automatic waters out in the field that are heated, and we try to keep the water temperature that's at a place where horses will consume, because if it's too cold, they won't consume water. But we keep them outside. We don't have respiratory disease. We don't have sick horses. We don't get sick horses when they go to our training center there, because we use the same philosophy. The barn is open. You know, the back doors on the barn is open. It doesn't matter temperature. You know, nobody's ever convinced me that it was a hell of a lot warmer in a barn than it is outside. There might be less wind, but if it's 20 below zero, it's 20 below zero. So it's not, you know, you're protecting them from wind, but if they have a windbreak or something or plenty to eat of hay, they're going to be able to survive. But I'm a dyed-in-the-wool, you raise a better horse outside person. And a lot of times we do it because it makes us comfortable, not because the horse really wants to be comfortable. And rugs, don't do it. I mean, if you let them grow a winter coat, all you do putting a rug on them is squeeze the loft. And it's kind of like if you have a goose down jacket on and then you put spandex on top of it, it's not the same goose down jacket as it was before you spandexed it. You know, so I'm an outside person, and I think horses love cold. And in all my life, I've had one bad deal with cold, and it was -19 degrees in February in Lexington, and I had a mare lay down and foal, and they didn't. I was in Rio at Carnival because it was much warmer down there, and where the filly was born, you know, it was cold, and they didn't have a warm room, and so they didn't get her ears dried off quick enough, and it froze half her ears off. And we named her Frigid Sister, and she stakes placed and can run. She's 3. But that's the only really, and up in the Dakotas, I've seen horses that are out in the wild, you know, that have their ears frostbit off. But I think they tolerate cold. I think a horse is a hell of a lot more cold tolerant than they are heat tolerant. You know, yep.
Agree that horses up north, they're much tougher and they don't get sick.
Right.
As long as there's not too much traffic in and out of the barn.
Right. Yeah, which makes a difference. But to me, a barn basically is a petri dish for disease. Doesn't matter what your hygiene is. It's a petri dish for disease. And when we have outbreaks of foal diarrhea or different clostridial diarrheas or different things, the only way we get them stopped is foal outside. Take them outside. You know, and so I do a lot of work in Australia, and all of the mares are foaled outside. Now, environmentally, it's different, but they'll have 6 or 8 mares in kind of a pre-foaling paddock, and then they have these foaling paddocks that are predominantly kikuyu grass, and it makes a very thick carpet. And when those mares start to break their water, they take them from that little pasture they're in into the foaling paddock, and they foal outside or clean up outside, and they don't have near the foal disease problems there that we tend to have here. And I think a lot of it is UV light, you know, the way you kill some of these organisms. It's the ability to use good biosecurity by changing from paddock to paddock where they foal. Whereas in a barn here, I don't care how fastidious you are in your hygiene, there can be problems.